Good morning, everybody. I'm going to turn the lights down just for a second, so that way the video can, because as y'all know, the lighting system in here is difficult. So I'm going to turn the lights off just for a second to make sure that if you're rewatching this video or if you're watching it for the first time, you have a chance to pause the video to get a good look at the pictures. I'm going to try to start doing that in the future. And then obviously for you guys, I want you to, you can look to the side view. But here's the conversation. Nothing changes in terms of our process. External forces are trying to do this. I need internal forces that are trying to do that. Those muscles are. We're just adding one extra little part into the rabbit hole, and that is, hey, of those muscles that are doing the job, are any affected length tension-wise because of a position of another joint that they pull at? Okay? So for this one, what I would love for you guys to consider by yourself, with a neighbor, friend, phone a friend, is these two exercises we agree are doing the same thing in terms of agonist. But maybe if you look closer, you may notice there's different hip positions. Does that make sense? So that's my question to you. How would the different hip positions affect certain muscles that cross the hips and the knees? How would they affect them? By being more flexed, what would that mean? And by being less flexed, what would that mean? So I'll give you a couple minutes. If I phrased a test question like this, which of these exercises would have more? Notice it's not all or none. It's like on or off. No, it's just we can vary what percentage of the work, whatever that plate is on, we can vary the contribution based off of length tension. So if I phrased it, which one of these would have a little bit less contribution to the hamstrings? Membranosus, tendinosis, biceps femoris. Which one would the hamstrings contribute? I'm not saying they're not contributing. It's not like they're going to turn off. But if you slack them at one joint, they're going to tug less on the other joint. If you lengthen them at one joint, they're going to tug more at the other joint. So I would say based off of length tension, the hamstrings would be contributing a little bit less on the right because the hips are more flexed on the left. So if the hips are more flexed, that means I'm going to be stretching them more. And so when you extend that knee, they're going to be really tight. be able to want to pull back. This information is useful because although we attribute all of our knee flexion pullers to hamstrings, there's other muscles that pull in the direction of knee flexion. And so knowing that, if you're like, hey, hamstrings, I know you guys are some all-stars, but we're trying to get a little extra work on the popliteus today, or we're trying to get some sartorius work and some gracilis work, and the gracilis is a little atrophied, and we're trying to get that gracilis to work. Wouldn't it make sense you'd want to put them in a position to increase the contribution as much as possible of the hamstrings? You want to try to put them in as much slack as possible. Maybe even put them in a prone position where that hip is extended as possible, and then do some curls in that way, because at least the hamstrings are as much slack as possible. Just giving you an example of how you can play off of position at other joints while working agonist at a different joint. Okay. Something like this. We did it last class. But if I phrase this question, which hip extensor muscle, and I might say one, I might say plural, but which agonist, which specific agonistic muscle would we be emphasizing in this exercise? And on the test, I'm going to give like a muscle, and then I'm going to give a reason why. So in other words, I might say hamstrings are emphasized at the hip because the knees are flexed. Or I might say the gluteus maximus is emphasized at the hip because the knees are flexed. I'm gonna spin it like that. So this is one that we did the other day, but I wanted to clarify specifically the type of questions that I'm going to ask. I don't want you guys going in blind saying, man, that was a bunch of stuff about nothing. How does he going to ask me questions about it? Okay. So which hip extensor would we be focusing on, emphasizing? You guys use words like targeting. And now we should be able to explain why a specific muscle would be emphasized, targeted, isolated. Words that are used in the therapy room and in the gym. So give that a few seconds, and then we'll answer. And let me turn off the light for just a few seconds so that if you rewatch the watch, you'll have a clear picture. I thought about this the other day. That works. Unfortunately, it all puts us to sleep. So here. On the test, I'm going to have answer choices. We've done this before. Y'all are my advanced students. Y'all have had me before. You guys know my madness. On the test, I'll have gluteus maximus because the knees are flexed. Semimembranosus is emphasized because the knees are flexed. Gluteus maximus because the knees are extended. I'm just going to flip-flop. Okay? So the gluteus maximus doesn't cross the knee joint, so it's not affected by knee joint position. It doesn't care. Its link tension is only going to be because of hip position. However, our hamstrings, semimembranosus, tendinosus, biceps femoris, long head at the hip, are affected by knee position. So when you flex the knee, you put those hamstring muscles on slack. That doesn't mean the hamstrings aren't still pulling. That just means they're not pulling to their total potential. Just like if I have a rubber band, it still might be pulling, but I know if I stretched it, it could pull more. Same thing. So the answer would be gluteus maximus would be emphasized here because the knees are flexed. So in other words, for the same given work, the gluteus maximus is going to take up that slack that the hamstrings are in. I love this example because intuitively we know people do this exercise to grow their booty, to grow their butt. And now we can explain why. Because the gluteus maximus has to do a majority of that work because the other muscles that could potentially help the gluteus maximus are on slack. Does that make sense? So we talked about it before, but now I want to get into how can I ask questions? I could ask a question, which hip extensor, or I might ask you to figure it out. Am I hip flexors or hip extensors? You guys know it's hip extensors. Which of the following muscles would lessen their contribution as an agonistic muscle because of the knee position? Well, if that's the case, just put down one of my hamstring muscles that I'm going to get. Can't be the gluteus. It's not affected by the knee position. I'm giving you the type of questions that I can ask. Okay. Is this helpful? Helpful? Okay, let's do some more. Today's 8. Let's do. Okay. All right. Two main different ways I could ask this question. I could ask which agonist at the knee would be emphasized, or I could ask which agonist of the knee would be de-emphasized. In other words, a lessened contribution. Which one would potentially work a little more? Which ones would work a little less based off of the hip position? Now, guys, on the test, I'm going to flip-flop. I'm going to give you, I might give you a hamstring muscle as an option, just as I'm going to see if you know you're working the quads, not the hamstring. I'm just going to put muscles. But if I put the following answers, let's say, put it on paper. First of all, do your process. External force, agonist, who are those muscles? Okay. So let's say I did. So rectus femoris because the hips are flexed, rectus femoris because the hips are extended, vastus medialis because the hips are flexed, vastus medialis because the hips are extended. I'm going to give you several questions. We're going to use the same intervals. Can you guys see those choices from that angle? Let's try this. So rectus femoris, because the hips are flexed, rectus femoris. Go ahead and write those down and take a picture. And I'm just going to ask different questions. We use the same answer choices. Full front. If I ask the question on the test, which of my knee extensors would have an increased contribution at the knee based off of the hip position? Increased contribution at the knee because of the hip position. That would be vastus medialis because the hips are flexed. Now, you may say, well, wait, Campbell, the vastus medialis doesn't cross the hip. Yeah, you're right, but the rectus does. And since the hips are flexed, that rectus is going to be put on slack. And since the rectus is put on slack, that's like having a tug of war where you have to maintain 100 pounds of pull. Then all of a sudden, one of your teammates lets go of one hand. Well, if you still have to pull with 100 pounds, you have to take up that slack and pull more. Does that make sense? So if I asked which of the quad muscles, which of the knee extensors would have to work more based off of the hip position, that's how muscles have to work. Because the rectus is on slack. And then the other way is I could say which one of my knee muscles has less of a contribution based off of hip position. Well, if that's the case, it's the rectus femoris because the hips are less. Better? Feeling okay? All right. Let's go to this one. If I could find a good picture. Oh, that's a good picture. This. All right, guys. I would love for you to be able to tell me which of her hip muscles, specific hip muscles, are being optimally stretched. Bless you. Which of her hip muscles, I think we could both, or all of us can infer that it's her left hip we're analyzing, right? The other one looks to be anatomically like. So which of her left hip muscles is she optimally stretching? So now we're looking at a specific muscle that we can name and identify because of some other positions that other muscles cross into. In other words, she's going further into a hip position because she doesn't have to worry about other muscles stopping her prematurely. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, hint, hint. Give this one a lot of time. And also, I always encourage you to discuss it with your neighbors. And then we'll go over some different answer choices, some different answer options I can give you. Oh, I'm going to turn off the light for 1 second so that you can see the picture better. Pause it, take a picture of it. I hope y'all aren't becoming allergic to fried ice. Those are sad. I'm lying, wrong dragon. That event last night was long. Once you guys get it, so one of the negatives about giving you multiple choice options is that, and it's not a you thing, it's an is. It's an is thing. One of the negatives about giving you multiple choice options too early is that we go right to those options and we don't practice the ability to answer it analytically like a fill in the blank, like a discussion question. So that's why I'm letting you think about the right answer first, then I'll give you some answer choices because I don't want your brain to go right into answer choices. As my boys say, it's a strat. That's what they call strategy, I guess. I'm a boomer. Okay. Are y'all ready for some answer choices now? Is it okay if I just state the answer choices? Because writing for me is really tough. Okay. Here are your answer choices. Remember, the question is, which muscle at the hip am I optimally stretching? I'm really targeting a specific muscle at the hip, and I could explain why. Okay. Answer choice number one, semimembranosus, because the knee is flexed. Answer choice two, semimembranosus, because the knee is extended. If you put that as an answer choice, let's talk about changing our majors. Some people may be watching it, guys, they know the difference between knee flexion and knee extension. So I'm not being serious. What if one person got up and like, oh, come back. Oh, it's just shoulder. Maybe I need to change my major. Gluteus maximus, because the knee is flexed. Gluteus maximus, because the knee is extended. Now, have another conversation with yourself or your partner based off of those answer choices and tell me which one fits best. You guys see how this could be useful in a clinic? Huh? Absolutely. Heck yes. All right, guys, which of those answer choices fits best? Gluteus maximus, because the knee is flexed. Yeah. Now, this is where for some students, and rightfully so, this is kind of new. This is a new way of teaching. This is practical teaching. You might be like, well, wait, the gluteus maximus doesn't cross the knee. It's indirectly affected because of muscles that are directly affecting. So in other words, if this person is trying to flex their hip with their leg straight, there's no way they get to that finished position because the hamstrings are going to get in the way of their range of motion. Their flexion is going to stop early if their hamstrings are lengthened because they cross multiple joints, and they're going to be the limiting factor. You unlock the knee, you flex the knee, put those muscles on slack, you're going to be able to continue to flex your hip. Thus, your gluteus maximus is like, oh, this is what a stretch feels like. Does that make sense? That's what's happening. That's what's happening. Any follow-up questions so far about the examples we've done and how these questions are going to be worded? Yes. You know. Over here. I think that's a good move. Did I'm really gonna have to create a different folder, but this is a dyslexic. Lindsay, was it you that saw all the windows open in my computer, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, there's all these windows." Like, yeah, I'm like, that's how my brain works. Because I'm so afraid to forget to do something, I just leave all the windows open. Okay, guys, let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. So let's look at her left hip. Let's look at her left hip. And I'm going to ask you a yes or no question. I'm going to ask a lot of questions, not all at the same time. Yes or no? Is she optimally stretching her rectus femoris? Don't answer it right away. Give it some thought. Is she optimally stretching her rectus femoris? And if the answer is yes, then you're done. But if the answer is no, I'd love for you to have a follow-up conversation. That's tell me, did she optimally stretch her rectus femoris? Let me do the trick. Uh, is she optimally stretching her left rectus femoris? Yes or no? No, it could go more. So what could she do to stretch it more? Now, you may say, well, she can't because she's going to fall over. Well, obviously, she'd have to maybe stand up on that right leg. But if she flexes her knee, that would stretch her rectus femoris more often, right? Because the rectus is not just a hip flexor, it's a knee extensor. So we need to flex the knee and extend the hip if we really want to stretch that muscle. Any soccer players, okay, or football players when they're punting? I'm just going to give you an example of how something like the rectus femoris can be lengthened at both ends to help it. You know, if you're going to shoot a slingshot or if you're going to pop someone with a rubber band, you want to stretch it as much as possible. The more stored elastic potential energy you give it, the more it's going to transfer into kinetic energy. So when someone is punting or kicking, what they're going to do is they're going to stretch that rectus at the hip, and they're also going to flex their knee so that they're really stretching that rubber band as much as possible. And then they're going to transfer that energy to the hip and then continue to transfer that energy into the knee. Just an example of how you can use a hip flexor knee extensor to kick a ball. Does that make sense about the rectus? Okay. So by logic, if, bless you. Now that's not to say there's a bad stretch. If I flexed my knee, I probably can't extend my hip that much, like because the rectus is now going to be super tight, and the rectus is like, dude, I'm being stretched in my knee. Your hip isn't getting to that position. So what I want you to be aware of is that if your knee is not flexed and you extend your hip, great. That just means other hip flexors get to be stretched now, because the rectus isn't the limiting factor. You can go further back if you don't stretch the rectus, and you can stretch other hip flexors like iliopsoas. So this isn't a, you should always do it this way. It's to just show you how these different joints can affect muscles that cross other joints. And if you're trying to target an iliopsoas, you don't want to have your knee flexed because that rectus is going to be a limiting factor. You want to put that rectus on slack so that you can extend that hip a little bit more and you'll feel it in a different place. Cool. Let's do some agonist practice. I think we have a good understanding of the length tension stuff. Let's do some agonist practice. Okay? The question is, he lowers his leg down. I think I've asked this on several tests in the past. So he starts in this position and he lowers his leg down. What I would love for you to do right now is get an agonistic group. Who are the muscles in that group? And then once you have that, I'll give you some answer choices. Okay? Because again, I don't want to give you the answer choices too soon because it'll bypass our lobby. I'm telling you, this is going to be a question similar to this is going to be on your test. And then on Monday, we're going to get into ankle and subtalar. Okay, are we ready for some answer choices? Okay. A is tensor fascia lata. Wait, first let me give you a scenario. I think I did. He lowers his leg down. Did I say that? Great. He lowers his leg down. And obviously you guys know he's not smashing a bug on the ground. It's going to be slow and controlled unless there's some functional reason to do so. So he lowers his leg down. Is that the tensor fascia latae through concentric? The tensor fascia latae, boy, latte sounds good. A tensor fascia latae through eccentric. Is it adductor magnus through concentric, or is it adductor magnus through eccentric? A, B, C, or D? A, B, C, or D? D. Yeah. Adductor magnus, which is one of our adductors. We would need adductors. So we just need to see which one I put. And through eccentric contraction. Because adductors are going to allow the abduction, because when he lowers his leg down, it's going to be right hip abduction, correct? So an adductor is going to allow the abduction through eccentric. Now, while we're on this one, let's look at limb tension a little bit. What if I wanted to decrease the contribution of the gracilis muscle? Would I want to keep my knee in that position, or do I want to flex my knee? Flex my knee, absolutely. And the gracilis isn't a heavy hitter, but if I put it on slack, other agonists have to take up that slack. Okay? So that's how that would work. Or if I want to stretch the gracilis, I want to abduct, but I also want to make sure my knee is extended. All right, let's do this one. And do it. I'm just talking about finding the silly picture. Yeah, I can't do it. Guys, assess what you should be able to do on your own is identify the agonistic group and the specific muscles in that group. And then all you're waiting for me to do is give you the right muscle that's in that group. And then associate it with the contraction. Let's go left to right. Let's go left to right. And I may not give, so obviously you're going to have one member of the agonistic group, but I could just randomly give you muscles. I mean, I could give you a hip external rotator. I could give you, I mean, there's no rule that says I have to give you like an antagonist. I mean, so here's your answer choices. Piriformis through concentric, piriformis through eccentric. Quadratus femoris. I may give you an external rotator, maybe a random. I may give you external oblique. I don't know, just random muscles. So piriformis concentric, piriformis eccentric, and let's do quadratus femoris concentric, quadratus femoris eccentric. You should eliminate those two last ones because none of them are in your agonistic group. So you say, oh, piriformis is in my team. He's one of the members of my team. So piriformis. Now remember, the reason I like to bring it back to agonistic pull is because it helps to show the contractions easier. It's harder to say, oh, piriformis through concentric or piriformis through eccentric. But if you say piriformis, the abductor does abduction concentrically, and the abductor does adduction eccentrically. That's why we want to keep bringing it back to how they pull, because it's a lot cleaner and easier to discuss muscles, motion, and contraction. That makes sense? Johnny the firefighter is putting out the fire. Billy the policeman is going on. Just what does it do helps us to see how it's working, in my opinion. Was today useful? Beneficiary? Okay, so Monday we're going to do ankle and subtalar joint, and we'll do some practice on Wednesday. Thursday we might do a general overall practice. Monday will be your review. The next Monday will be your guided review with any other questions, and then our exam 2 will be that next Wednesday. Y'all take care, everybody.